It was a frigid evening on December 22, 1998, in a small Ohio town where snow fell in thick sheets, blanketing the ground and muffling every sound. Sarah, a 14-year-old girl with sandy blonde hair and curious hazel eyes, sat alone in her parents' big, old house. Her mom and dad had gone to a holiday party in a town an hour away, leaving her to watch the place. The house perched on the edge of town, surrounded by tall pines bending under the weight of snow, their branches scraping the roof like skeletal fingers. Wind howled through the cracks in the wooden walls, creating an eerie backdrop of moans and whistles. Sarah nestled on the living room couch, wrapped in a warm blanket patterned with reindeer, the TV flickering with Home Alone, a movie she found ironically amusing tonight. She even smirked, picturing herself setting traps like Kevin for imaginary burglars. But outside, the snow thickened, burying the world deeper, and around 9 p.m., the lights blinked, once, twice, then died. The TV screen went black, leaving only a faint crackle of static in the silence. Sarah tossed the blanket aside and stood, feeling a cold draft brush her legs through her socks. She padded quietly to the kitchen, where an old flashlight sat in a drawer, her dad's emergency backup. Her fingers trembled as she fumbled past forks and spoons, finally clicking it on. The beam was weak, illuminating just a few feet ahead, casting jagged shadows on the walls where faded family photos hung crookedly. She shuffled back to the living room, sweeping the light over familiar shapes: the worn couch, the scratched wooden coffee table, a bookshelf stuffed with dusty novels. The wind screamed louder, rattling the windows as if something were clawing to get in. Sarah swallowed hard, telling herself it was just a storm, nothing to fear. But as she approached the window to check the latch, her heart skipped. Amid the wind's wail, she caught a whisper, soft, barely audible, yet distinct. "Sarah!" The voice was low, raspy, like a breath carried from far away yet impossibly near. She froze, gripping the flashlight until her knuckles whitened. "It's the wind," she whispered, her voice quivering as she tried to steady herself. But it came again, clearer. "Sarah!" Her eyes widened in terror. She spun, slashing the beam across the room's dark corners. But nothing was there, just shadows dancing in the dim glow. Her breath quickened, chest tightening with dread. She yanked her old flip phone from her pocket. No signal. The storm must have knocked out the lines. She darted to the landline on the kitchen wall, snatching the receiver. Dead silence, no dial tone, just a faint rustle like breathing. She dropped it, the clatter echoing too loudly in the stillness. Then it hit, a heavy thud from upstairs, in her parents' bedroom on the second floor. The sound was solid, like something big had dropped. Sarah stood rooted, staring at the ceiling. The floorboards above creaked faintly, as if under weight. She gulped, convincing herself it was the old house settling beneath the snow. But another thud landed, closer, sharper, like a deliberate step. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She aimed the shaky beam at the staircase leading up. It trembled in her grip, throwing long shadows across the worn wooden steps. The darkness beyond them felt alive, thick, hiding anything or anyone. Cold sweat trickled down her spine. This wasn't her imagination anymore. Someone, or something, was in the house with her. Sarah stood paralyzed, her flashlight beam locked on the staircase as her mind raced to make sense of the sounds. The second thud lingered in her ears, a heavy echo that refused to fade. She clutched the flashlight tighter, its plastic creaking under her grip, and took a shaky step back toward the couch. The wind outside roared, slamming against the house, but it couldn't mask what came next, a slow, rhythmic creak from the stairs. 1 step. 2. 3. Each sound was deliberate, measured, like someone, or something, descending with purpose. Her breath itched, coming in short, panicked gasps. She ducked behind the couch, dropping to her knees, the coarse carpet scraping her skin. She clicked off the flashlight, plunging herself into darkness, and pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle the sob clawing up her throat. "It's a raccoon," she told herself, or a branch hitting the roof. Anything but what her gut screamed. Someone was there. The creaking stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating, wrapping around her like a shroud. She strained to hear over the pounding of her own heart, every nerve on edge. Then, a sound, a low, guttural chuckle, unmistakably human, rolled through the room. It wasn't the wind playing tricks. It was real, close, and wrong. Her blood turned to ice, her body trembling uncontrollably. She peeked over the couch's edge, her eyes adjusting to the dark, and wrist flicking the flashlight back on for a split second. The beam caught something, a shadow, tall and distorted, sliding across the far wall near the kitchen doorway. It wasn't her shadow, it moved too fluidly, too independently. She snapped the light off, biting her lips so hard she tasted blood to keep from screaming. The shadow vanished, but she heard a new sound, metal clinking, sharp and precise, from the kitchen. The knife block. Her stomach lurched as she pictured a blade being drawn, the steel glinting in unseen hands. Panic surged, a wild animal clawing inside her chest. She couldn't stay here exposed. Crawling on her belly, she inched toward the basement door near the stairs, her only chance to hide. Her fingers brushed the cold knob, and she slipped inside, easing the door shut behind her with a soft click. The basement stairs groaned under her weight, each step a betrayal of her position. She reached the bottom, her socks silent on the concrete, and pressed against the damp wall, listening. Above, the floorboards creaked again, slow, heavy footsteps moving toward the kitchen, then stopping. Her mind spun. Who were they? How did they get in? The storm had buried the roads. No one should have been out here. She crouched, hugging her knees, the darkness pressing in like a living thing. Then, the basement door creaked open. A sliver of faint moonlight spilled down the stairs, cutting through the black. Sarah! The voice rasped, closer now, dripping with menace. It knew her name. How did it know her name? She scrambled backward, her shoulder bumping a rusty pipe that clanged against the wall. She froze, cursing silently, but the footsteps didn't hesitate. They started down the stairs, one agonizing step at a time. Her eyes darted, searching for a hiding spot in the cluttered gloom. She spotted an old wardrobe in the corner, its doors warped and peeling. She darted to it, squeezing inside among moth-eaten coats that smelled of decay. The musty fabric brushed her face as she pulled the doors shut, leaving a hairline crack to peek through. The footsteps reached the basement floor, boots scuffing the concrete. Silence fell again, heavy and oppressive. Then, a new sound, scratching, slow and deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. It was close, too close. Her breath caught as she realized it wasn't coming from outside the wardrobe. It was inside. Something cold and clammy grazed her ankle, and her scream tore free before she could stop it. All right, I'll write all remaining parts for both stories in English, each exactly 5,000 characters, without interruption. Here we go, starting with part 3 of The Whispering Shadows, through part 7, then all 7 parts of The Locked Room. Buckle up for the terror. Sarah's scream echoed in the cramped wardrobe, her voice raw and piercing as the cold, clammy touch slithered up her calf. She kicked wildly, her foot connecting with something soft yet unyielding, something that didn't belong among the coats. The wardrobe doors burst open as she stumbled out, landing hard on the concrete basement floor. Her flashlight was gone, lost in the chaos, leaving her blind in the suffocating dark. Behind her, the thing moved, a wet, ragged breath hissed from the wardrobe, followed by a low growl that vibrated through the air. She scrambled to her feet, hands scraping the rough floor, and bolted toward the stairs. Her socked feet slipped on the damp concrete, but adrenaline propelled her forward. The basement smelled of mildew and rot, the air thick with a metallic tang she hadn't noticed before. She reached the stairs, her hands clawing at the splintered wood, when a loud thud shook the floor behind her. Whatever it was had leapt from the wardrobe. She didn't dare look back. Her legs pumped, carrying her up the creaking steps 2 at a time, her breath coming in sharp, panicked bursts. The basement door loomed ahead, still ajar, the sliver of moonlight her only guide. She lunged through it, slamming it shut behind her and shoving a nearby chair under the knob with trembling hands. The chair wobbled, its legs uneven, but it held, for now. She backed away, her eyes locked on the door, chest heaving. Silence fell, broken only by the wind howling outside, rattling the house like a beast trying to claw its way in. Then, a slow scrape, nails dragging down the other side of the door. Her stomach dropped. The thing was right there, inches away, separated only by flimsy wood. She turned, scanning the dark living room for an escape. The front door was her best bet, but when she reached it, the knob wouldn't turn, locked, and the key her parents always left in the bowl was gone. The windows were next. She raced to the nearest one, yanking at the latch, but it wouldn't budge, frozen shut or jammed. Her fist pounded the glass, desperation mounting, but it held firm. From the basement, a loud bang, the chair splintered, and the door flew open. Heavy footsteps thudded up the stairs, slow and taunting, as if savoring her fear. Sarah darted to the kitchen, her socks sliding on the linoleum, and grabbed a butcher knife from the counter. The blade gleamed faintly in the moonlight filtering through the blinds. She gripped it tight, her knuckles white, and crouched behind the island, peering out. The footsteps stopped at the threshold. Silence again, but it was alive, watching, waiting. Then, the phone rang. Shrill and sudden, it shattered the stillness. She lunged for it, hope flaring, maybe her parents, maybe help, but the line crackled with static. "ICU." The voice rasped through the noise, low and deliberate. She dropped the receiver, its cord dangling, and the lights flickered back on. Her breath caught as she saw muddy boot prints glistening on the floor, leading from the back door straight to where she hid. Sarah's eyes locked on the boot prints, fresh, wet, and smeared, as if someone had just walked through. The lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that twisted the familiar kitchen into a nightmare. She clutched the butcher knife, its handle slick with her sweat, and spun around, scanning for the intruder. The room was empty, but the prints told a story. Someone had come in from outside, circled the house, and stood right where she was now. Her gaze darted to the back door. It hung slightly ajar, snow swirling in on the wind. She hadn't heard it open. Her heart pounded, a frantic rhythm against her ribs, as she edged toward the living room. The phone dangled off the hook, its faint static hum mocking her. The voice, "ICU," looped in her mind, chilling her to the core. How could they see her? Where were they? A floorboard creaked behind her. She whirled, knife raised, but nothing was there, just the empty doorway to the basement, now a black moss spilling cold air. She backed away, her socks silent on the hardwood, until her hip bumped the couch. The lights flickered again, plunging the room into brief darkness before snapping back on. Each flicker felt like a heartbeat, counting down to something awful. Then a shadow moved, fast, darting from the kitchen to the stairs. She stifled a scream, her free hand gripping the couch arm. The footsteps resumed, climbing the stairs now, heavy and uneven. She had to move. Dropping to a crouch, she scurried to the front door again, tugging at it futilely before racing to the coat closet. Inside, she found her dad's old toolbox, rusted, but heavy. She grabbed a hammer, clutching it in her other hand, and slipped back into the kitchen. The back door rattled violently, hinges groaning as the wind, or something else, slammed against it. She froze, knife and hammer trembling in her grip. The lights died again, and in the dark, she heard it, a wet scraping sound, like something dragging itself across the floor. It was coming from the living room. She bolted upstairs, her legs burning, and ducked into her parents' bedroom, locking the door with a shaky twist. She shoved their oak dresser against it, the wood screeching across the floor, and collapsed against it, panting. The house fell silent again, but it was a lie. She could feel eyes on her, boring through the walls. A faint tap started, rhythmic, insistent, from the closet. She gripped her weapons tighter and crept toward it, her breath shallow. The tapping grew louder, a steady beat that synced with her pulse. She yanked the closet door open, hammer raised, but it was empty, just coats and boxes, swaying slightly as if touched by a draft. The tapping didn't stop. It shifted behind her now. She spun, and her blood ran cold. The dresser scraped an inch across the floor, the door behind it rattling as something pushed from the other side. She swung the hammer wildly, striking the door, but the pressure only grew. A low laugh seeped through the wood, chilling her spine. She had no choice. She climbed out the window onto the snowy roof, the icy shingles biting her hands. The cold air hit her like a slap, but she slid down, landing in a snowbank with a muffled thud. She glanced up, nothing at the window. Yet. Sarah stumbled to her feet, snow clinging to her pajamas, the knife still clutched in her frozen hand. The hammer was lost in the fall, buried somewhere in the drift. The storm raged around her, wind whipping her hair into her face, stinging her eyes with icy flakes. The house loomed behind her, its dark windows like hollow eyes watching her every move. She scanned the yard, empty, pristine, no tracks but her own. Her breath puffed in frantic clouds as she ran toward the neighbor's house half a mile away, the only other light in this forsaken stretch of nowhere. Her socks soaked through, numbing her feet, but fear drove her forward. The silence of the snow was oppressive, swallowing her gasps, making every crunch of her steps deafening. She risked a glance back, and froze. A face pressed against the living room window, pale and eyeless, its mouth stretched in a grotesque smile. It was there, then gone in a blink. She screamed, the sound lost in the wind, and tripped, the knife skittering across the ice. She scrambled for it, her fingers numb, and clutched it again, her eyes darting. The house was still, no movement, no face. Had she imagined it? Her mind reeled, but the boot prints, the voice, they were real. She pushed on, the neighbor's porch light a faint beacon through the blizzard. Halfway there, she heard it again. "Sarah!" whispered from the trees to her left. She spun, knife slashing at nothing, her scream caught in her throat. The pines swayed, their branches creaking, but no one was there. Her legs trembled, threatening to give out, but she forced herself to keep moving. The porch was close now, 50 yards, maybe less. She pounded up the steps, hammering the door with her fist. "Help! Please!" No answer. The windows were dark, the house dead. The neighbors were gone, vacation, she remembered too late. A twig snapped behind her. She turned, and the figure stood at the edge of her yard, tall, motionless, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It hadn't been there seconds ago. Her chest tightened, her breath a shallow rasp. She banged again, harder, but the silence mocked her. The figure took a step forward, its outline blurring in the snow. She bolted down the steps, heading for the gas station a mile up the road, the only place still open in this storm. Her lungs burned, her vision swam, but she didn't stop. Another glance back. The figure was closer, gliding over the snow without leaving tracks. She pushed harder, tears freezing on her cheeks, until the station's neon sign flickered into view. She burst inside, collapsing against the counter, sobbing to the clerk. "Someone's after me!" The man grabbed his phone, dialing the police, his eyes wide as she babbled about the face, the voice, the shadow. Outside, the snow fell heavier, hiding whatever hunted her. Sarah huddled in the gas station, the clerk's old jacket draped over her shoulders as she shivered uncontrollably. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on the linoleum floor stained with coffee spills. The clerk, a grizzled man named Tom with a gray beard, locked the door and kept watch through the glass, his shotgun resting on the counter. "Cops'll be here soon," he muttered, though his voice wavered. The storm had delayed them, roads were a mess, dispatch said. Sarah nodded numbly, her hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee she couldn't bring herself to drink. Her eyes stayed glued to the window, searching the swirling white for that figure. The knife lay on the counter beside her, its blade scratched from her fall. She replayed the night, every thud, every whisper, trying to piece it together. Who was it? How did they know her? The station's heat rattled through ancient vents, but it couldn't touch the cold inside her. Tom paced, muttering about drifters and weird folks passing through town. "Seen some odd ones lately," he said, glancing at her. "You sure you locked up tight?" She nodded, but doubt not at her. The back door had been open, the key missing. Her mind flashed to the eyeless face. Its smile burned into her memory. A sudden thud against the glass made her jump, spilling coffee across the counter. Tom grabbed the shotgun, peering out. "Just a branch," he said, but his grip stayed tight. The wind screamed, louder now, and Sarah's stomach twisted. She felt it, something watching, waiting, just beyond the light. The phone rang, shrill and jarring. Tom answered, his face paling as he listened. "Yeah, she's here. Hurry." He hung up, avoiding her eyes. "Cops found your place trashed. They're close." Minutes dragged like hours. Sarah's nerves frayed with every gust rattling the station. Then, a shadow flickered outside, not a branch, but something upright, moving fast. She pointed, voice cracking. "There!" Tom swung the shotgun up, but it was gone. The lights flickered, plunging them into darkness for a heartbeat before snapping back. A low laugh echoed outside, circling the building. Sarah grabbed the knife, backing against the wall. The glass door rattled, once, twice, then stopped. Tom aimed, sweat beading on his brow. "Stay back," he growled. The silence that followed was worse, thick, predatory. Then, a whisper slithered through the cracks. "Sarah!" she screamed, and Tom fired, the blast shattering the silence but hitting nothing. The shadow was gone again. Headlights pierced the snow. Police, finally. She collapsed as they stormed in, their radios crackling, guns drawn. Outside, the storm swallowed whatever had been there. The police bundled Sarah into a cruiser, its heater blasting as they sped back to her house. She stared out the window, the knife still in her lap, her mind numb. Two officers, a stern woman named Officer Hayes and a younger man, Jenkins, flanked her, their faces grim. "You're lucky," Hayes said, her voice clipped. "We've seen break-ins like this before." Sarah barely heard her, lost in the memory of that eyeless face. The house came into view, its windows shattered, snow drifting inside. Flashlights bobbed as more cops searched the yard, their shouts muffled by the wind. Hayes led her inside, where chaos reigned, furniture overturned, walls scratched, muddy boot prints everywhere. No forced entry. Jenkins muttered, shining his light on the back door. Someone had a key, or got in quiet. Sarah shivered, the missing key haunting her. They moved to the basement, where the wardrobe stood open, its doors hanging crookedly. Hayes frowned, pulling out a Polaroid from inside, a grainy shot of Sarah asleep in her bed, taken weeks ago. "Found this," she said, her tone hard. Sarah's knees buckled. Someone had been watching her, stalking her, for months. Upstairs, the mirror in her parents' room was shattered, glass crunching underfoot. Jenkins bagged the photo, muttering about evidence. The cops found no one, no tracks outside, no fingerprints, just destruction and that chilling image. Hayes questioned her, but Sarah's answers were fragmented, her voice hollow. "It knew my name," she whispered. The officers exchanged a look but said nothing. Hours later, her parents arrived, frantic, wrapping her in tearful hugs. The police stayed till dawn, but the intruder, or thing, had vanished. Locals whispered of a drifter who'd disappeared years back, a man who broke into homes, leaving only fear and rumors of a twisted figure haunting the woods. No one proved it, but the story stuck. Sarah never stayed home alone again, moving with her family to the city. Years later, unpacking her childhood things, she found another Polaroid tucked in a box, her on the roof that night, staring down at the figure staring up, its eyeless face smiling. She burned it, but the whispers never left her dreams.